Okay, so the next lecture is going to be about body fluids. We've talked about membrane transport, we've talked about cells, and so what you've learned is there is fluids inside the cells and outside the cells. And so we want to talk about all the fluids in your body, where they're located, how much you have in different parts of your body, and kind of how that body fluids are regulated. This is an introductory topic to this. We cover this even more detail as we move through the course, but just want to introduce these topics to you now. When you talk about fluids, we divide our body into compartments. And so if you think about an adult male, you have about 40 liters of water in your body. So all of the water in your body, if you could squeeze it out like a sponge into a measuring cup, it would be about 40 liters. And that's about 60% of your body weight. And we can divide that into what we call our intracellular fluid and our extracellular fluid. So this is what's inside the cell. So if you look at an actual cell, so take a cell, the stuff inside, that's intracellular. And then extracellular, that's the fluid that bathes the cells, it's around the cells, and also the fluid that makes up your blood, the plasma part, the liquid part of your blood. So about 40% of your body weight is actually fluid inside your cells, okay? So you have about 25 liters of fluid inside your cells. You have about 12 liters of fluid that kind of surround and bathe your cells, and about 3 liters of fluid inside your blood. So another way to look at this is to compartmentalize those body fluids and to think about it in a more visual way. Here's your extracellular fluid. So here's your fluid that's in your blood and in your lymph. And lymph is, there's fluid that kind of that bathes your tissues, and that fluid has to be able to get back into your circulation so that it can be processed and cleaned and recycled. And so that's called lymph. And so about 5% of your body weight is the fluid that's in your blood and your lymph. The rest of the fluid is the fluid that's actually bathing your cells, called the interstitial fluid. So this is the fluid that's kind of outside your cells. That's about 15% of your body weight. And most of the body weight, 40%, is that fluid inside the cells. So this is just another way of looking at that. When you think about how much of your body weight is made up of water, that can change based on your age and your gender. Infants are about 70% water. That's because they have low body fat and low bone mass. Females are about 50% water with a higher fat content and less muscle mass. And as you get older and you lose muscle mass, your percent water actually goes down. You may have noticed someone that's old, they seem like their skin's always kind of dry. They actually have less water in their body, so a lot of times even their skin seems dry because they're just less of their water weight, less of their body weight is due to water. So this is just another way to think about that. So what I have here is a kind of a generic connective tissue example, and so we really haven't covered tissues yet, but connective tissue is just the kind of tissue that connects us, it holds us together. It's the tissue that holds our organs together, kind of between spaces and things like that. So if you were just to look at maybe, let's just imagine, so this outer layer is called your epidermis, and then you have your dermal layer. And so your dermis is what's connecting your skin, this epidermis layer, to the layer underneath, which is your fat layer. So if you looked at skin, there would be a layer, and then another layer, and then kind of a big fatty layer. So this layer that's holding what you see onto your body, your dermis, is a bunch of connective tissue. And so when you look at connective tissue, it's going to be made up of fibers and structure and collagen and elastin, all these things, but there's also going to be cells inside that connective tissue. And so if you look at connective tissue, here's some fat cells, here's a macrophage and some other types of cells. There's fluid in these cells. So you have intracellular fluid in connective tissue, the fluid inside all of those cells. And then around all these cells, all these spaces, has fluid. Okay, so that's going to be your interstitial fluid. It's a type of extracellular fluid. It's the fluid that bathes those cells. And then a tissue is going to have a blood supply. So if a blood vessel is going through a tissue, there's fluid inside the blood. And so that's also extracellular fluid. The plasma that's going through the blood is your extracellular fluid. Now, what's important is fluid moves between these compartments, okay? So fluid is always moving from the cells into the interstitial fluid and into the blood. So I've got another diagram to show you that. So another way of looking at that is looking at how the body fluids move through the compartments. Here I have a blood vessel, and so remember, the fluid in blood is called the plasma, and so the fluid from the plasma can leave the blood vessel and go out into the interstitial fluid and bathe the cells. That fluid can then return to the blood vessels. The interstitial fluid can go into the cells. The fluid from the cells can go back into the interstitial fluid. So notice these arrows are going in all different directions, and the fluid is able to go out of the blood vessel, around the cells, into the cells, back out of the cells, and into the blood vessels. Now, something's causing that fluid to move, and the way we move fluid between compartments is using one of two pressures, either hydrostatic pressure or osmotic pressure. And hydrostatic pressure is basically, think about a force pressure. So think about turning on a hose, turning on the water to your hose, and you're pushing the water through, just the pressure of the water being put through your hose. So think about blood pressure. So the pressure inside your vessels can actually help push fluid out into the interstitial area, into the interstitial compartments. How do you get the blood, the fluid back into the blood? We have something called osmotic pressure. And so osmotic pressure, do you remember osmotic pressure sucks? So wherever you find sodium, that's going to draw the water back in. So you have a physical force, a hydrostatic pressure pushing water through, pushing water out, and then you have an osmotic pressure that can pull water back in. And so these two forces are going to be used to push and pull water throughout these different compartments. This will become real important when we talk about the kidney and how we use hydrostatic pressure and osmotic pressure to filter your blood and turn it into urine. So again, just remember you have these two types of pressures. One's a physical force that squeezes and pushes fluid, and then the osmotic pressure is based on the amount of solute, specifically usually sodium we're talking about, and wherever sodium is, water follows. And so those things are going to allow fluids to move in and out of the blood, in and out of the interstitial fluid, and in and out of the cells. So why do we care about body fluids? Well, they transport various things for us. So in this particular slide, we're going to look at blood, interstitial fluid, and then the fluid inside the cells. So one of the things they transport is gases. So our lungs, we use that to breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2. Well, we breathe in oxygen so we can make ATP. So we breathe the oxygen into our lungs, that goes into our blood, and then it's going to leave the blood, go out into the interstitial fluid, and then out into the cells. The cells are going to use that oxygen, and then they're going to get rid of a byproduct called carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is going to go into the interstitial fluid, into the blood, and then back into the lungs to be breathed out. So you need your blood and interstitial fluids to move those two gases. When you eat something, so food's coming into the stomach, or drink something, water's coming into the stomach, that's going to be absorbed from the stomach and the small intestine into the blood, and then from the blood into the interstitial fluid, and then to the cells, so that the cells can use the nutrients. The water is going to go from the stomach into the blood, into the interstitial fluid, and it's going to pass back and forth. It's going to be moved back and forth between the cells and the blood and the interstitial fluid based on sodium levels and hydrostatic pressures and osmotic pressures and things like that. So the water is going to constantly be moving back and forth as needed, depending on which compartment is needed at the time. Your kidneys, so ions, waste products are going to leave the cells, go out into the interstitial fluid, into the blood, and then the blood's going to go into the kidneys, and the kidneys are going to filter that out. So we use all of our organs and all of our fluid compartments to move things, okay? So a lot of times people just think about blood as the only liquid that moves things. It's very important, but interstitial fluid and the fluid inside the cells is also an important way for us to balance and move things throughout our body. So what are these body fluids made out of? Well, I've used the word water a lot, and so most of the body fluid is water, but it has things that are dissolved in it called solutes, And these solutes can be electrolytes and like ions, like sodium and chloride and potassium, or non-electrolytes. And non-electrolytes are your organic compounds, like your glucoses, your lipids, creatinine, urea. Electrolytes, think electricity, those are things that have a charge on them, so they break apart in water. So sodium chloride breaks it to sodium and chloride with a negative and positive charge. So again, your electrolytes are those ions that break apart in water, like your salts, acids and bases, and some proteins, okay? And these are important because when we talk about water balance, we have to know how much sodium we have because, again, water follows sodium. So regulating the amount of sodium in your body is important in regulating the amount of water in your body. People who have high blood pressure, a lot of times one of the first things they'll tell you to do is lower your sodium content in your diet. So the less sodium you take into your body, the less water your body's going to hold on to, so that water can be filtered out of your blood, and you can urinate that, and that'll reduce the amount of water in your blood vessels, and that'll actually lower your blood pressure. Doesn't always work, but it's always a good thing to try if you have high blood pressure. It's just to lower your sodium in your diet. So you want to know how much sodium, potassium, chloride, water you have in your body, because that's where all your chemical reactions are occurring. So all your chemical reactions that go on in your body have to occur in some kind of a fluid environment. So you want to make sure you keep your body fluids well regulated. And that's going to be a lot of the things that we cover throughout our study of A&P. When you think about electrolytes, they are not evenly distributed throughout the body. Some compartments have more electrolytes than others, or different composition of electrolytes than others. The red is blood, the blue is interstitial fluid, and this yellow is intracellular fluid. And we have all of our ions or electrolytes listed here. And you'll notice that in the blood compartment and in the interstitial fluid, you have high levels of sodium, but very low levels of sodium in the intracellular fluid. In the intracellular fluid, you have a lot of potassium, but not very much potassium inside the interstitial fluid or inside the blood. So these are very important. So what you're seeing is you have lots of sodium in your blood, in your interstitial fluid, and lots of potassium inside your cells. So I said that a little bit earlier about if you're having problems with your blood pressure. So if you're having problems with your blood pressure and you lower the amount of sodium in your diet, then you won't have as much sodium in your blood. Well, there's not as much sodium in your blood, there's not as much sodium to pull that water or hold on to that water, and that water is what can cause your blood pressure to be high. So regulating how much sodium is in your interstitial fluid and blood can help you regulate your blood pressure. Again, if you've ever been somewhere and you've noticed you've eaten a high salty diet like a pizza, and then the next day your hands are swollen, that's because all the sodium that was in that food can go out into your interstitial fluid and pull water into those fluids, and so now your fingers are swollen and you can't move your rings because you've had a lot of salt in your diet previously. Now, I don't ask you just to memorize a whole lot of things. I want you to learn things for understanding, but I do want you to memorize things from time to time. And this is going to be important. We're going to talk about this in muscles and the nervous system. We want to understand where we expect to find specific electrolytes, particularly potassium and sodium and chloride, when we think about inside the cell and outside the cell. So in general, when you look at an extracellular fluid, you're always going to have more sodium outside the cell in your extracellular fluid than you have inside the cell. And there's going to be more potassium inside the cell than there is outside the cell. This is exactly what you just saw in the previous slide when you had the little bars. It said the same thing. I just think this picture kind of helps you memorize it a little bit better. So I need you to remember that you always have more sodium outside the cell than inside the cell, and more potassium inside the cell than outside the cell. And this is going to come back to us when we get to muscles again, so you might as well memorize it now. So when we think about fluid, we think about fluid balance. Well, we've got to equal in and out, okay? So intake has got to equal output. So where do we get our water? Well, Most of our water comes from what we drink, about 60%, what we eat, okay, and then metabolic water. We actually produce some water. If you ever breathe out, maybe you fog up a mirror, that's vapor, that's water vapor. So our bodies actually make some water. So we need about 2.5 liters of water every day is what we need in our bodies. Now, to balance that, we've got to get rid of some. We've got to have what comes in has got to go out. So how do we get rid of water? Well, about 60% of the way we get rid of water is through urine production, okay? And so obviously, the more water that you drink, the more increased frequency you're going to urinate, okay? So that is one of the easiest ways to regulate water balance. What you drink in, you pee out, basically, all right? We also have what water we lose in our feces. Now, this can change based on whether or not you have diarrhea or constipation, okay? So 4% is just normal bowel function. If you're constipated, you're going to actually have lose less water. You have diarrhea, you're going to lose more water. Sweat, about 8%. This can change. So just every day, if you're working out, it's hot, you're sweating a lot, you can lose more. A cold day, you're not sweating, you're not going to lose as much. So this one can change. So urine's going to change based on how much you drink. Feces output can change based on your bowel function that day. And sweat can change based on temperature and exercise. Are you sweating a lot or not? Now, about 30%, 28%, we really can't control it all. This is where we lose about 30% of our fluid every day, and it doesn't really matter what we do. It's what we're breathing out. We have what's called insensible loss. Our skin is constantly evaporating off water, and we don't even realize it. We just lose water through our skin and through our lungs. Think about your mouth is wet, your eyes are wet. These tissues are always drying out, and we're giving up water. So we have to have at least that 700 mLs coming in every day. So that's why people say you're going to die if you're without water for just a couple of days, but you can live for a week or so without food. That's because we're constantly losing water. So we have to have a source of water coming in to make up for this amount of water that we're going to lose regardless of what we're doing. We're going to lose that amount of water if it's hot, if it's cold, if we're awake, if we're asleep. That's going to happen. So how do we regulate this intake and output? Well, if you need to have more water, you're going to be thirsty. So the thirst mechanism is a huge driving force for allowing us to increase our water input. And we actually have receptors, chemical receptors in our body that are measuring kind of the saltiness of our plasma. And so that's going to cause us to be thirsty. Your mouth may be thirsty. You may have a change in your blood pressure. So all of these things, your brain's going to pick up on these signals, and it's going to cause you to want to drink something, and you're going to drink something. All right. Once you drink water, that will kind of turn off the thirst centers in your brain. It's kind of hard to overhydrate. You have to really try hard to overhydrate, because once you drink a little bit of water, you're really not thirsty anymore. Because once you drink that water, your mouth is not dry anymore. That relieves that dry mouth, so that inhibition is gone, and it starts to activate your stomach receptors and intestinal receptors, and they feel the water coming down, and so they know, okay, she's drinking, we're good, so we don't have to be thirsty anymore. All right. So how do we get rid of water? Well, again, some of it we can't control. So we're going to lose water through our lungs and skin. Feces, again, that's not going to change much unless you're sick or constipated or have diarrhea. So mostly how we change how we get rid of water is based on what our kidneys do, okay? And so body water and sodium content are going to be regulated by our kidneys. And so if we need to get rid of more water, we're going to urinate more. If we need to hold on to more water, we're going to urinate less. And this can be driven by how much water and sodium we have in our body. So if our blood pressure is too high or too low, if our blood pressure is too low, we may say, we need to hold on to water. We need to hold on to sodium, hold on to water, put more water in the vessels, bring the blood pressure up. If our blood pressure is too high, we need to get rid of sodium, get rid of water, take that water out of the vessels, lower that blood pressure. Okay, this is some difficult concepts. We're going to cover this again, so don't freak out if you don't quite get it right now. I just want you to start understanding homeostasis and how we need to balance everything in our bodies, okay? Everything, including water. All right, so what happens if you do become dehydrated or you do become overhydrated? So let's just say you're somewhere and you haven't had anything to drink. So you're in a dehydrated state. What's happening? If you're in dehydration, so you're not getting enough water in, remember, we're going to lose water regardless, okay? Your kidneys are going to keep functioning, making some urine. You're still breathing out. You're still losing water from your skin. So if you're dehydrating, as this water is leaving your body, okay, you've got to keep enough water in your blood vessels to keep your blood pressure up, okay? Because the thing that we want to do is keep our heart and our brain alive. We need to have enough blood pressure, enough blood in our blood vessels to keep our heart and brain alive. So if you're losing water to the environment and you're not drinking, you're dehydrated, there's got to be some way to get water into the blood vessels. And so what we do is we start to pull water from the actual cells. So that intracellular fluid starts to be pulled out of the cells into the interstitial fluid, and then it's going to go into the blood vessels. And that's because as you lose water, the osmotic pressure inside the interstitial fluid rises, okay? And that will cause water to leave the cells by osmosis. All right, so osmotic pressure, that means the sodium level is rising, because as the water is leaving, okay, the sodium's staying in there, so it's getting higher and it's getting more and more concentrated. So the sodium concentration is going up and up and up. Well, the sodium concentration is going up. That's going to pull water out of those cells. Now, let's say now you finally found some water and you're drinking, and you've filled up your stomach, and all that water is leaving your small intestine and it's being pushed into the interstitial fluid. So now all of this water is going into the interstitial fluid, right? So now that sodium concentration is starting to drop. Okay, right? Sodium concentration is dropping. What's going to happen? If the sodium now is higher inside the cell than it is outside the cell, water gets pulled into the cells, and they're going to start to swell and possibly burst. Okay, so that's how the water's moving. So it's based on hydration and dehydration. Again, I realize these are complicated thoughts. I need you to think about it, do some reading about it. If you need some help on it, send an email to the instructor, and we'll talk about it some more. So again, just introducing this right now as a critical aspect of how homeostasis works is fluid and electrolyte balance. If you go into your textbook, there is more reading that you can do about this. All right, thank you for your attention.